to make sure that we're all on the same page and everything that we're talking about. PBIS is a multi-tiered framework, and it's based upon it's investing in that framework to organize our evidence-based practices that are also culturally relevant as well, to support the students, to increase and support the systems, which will in the end support the adults, and use data to support decision making so that we can achieve valued and equitable outcomes. I think the piece that's important is that each district has their own idea of what specific outcomes they want to have. Of course, we want all students to be successful. We want all teachers to enjoy their jobs and stay in their profession for a long time. But being specific of what types of gains you want for them, and focusing on that, and what are the practices we're engaging in to improve that, and what does the system need to do to reorganize itself in order for those practices to be able to be implemented with fidelity. So it's all, as you guys all know, it's all interconnected in that process, but it is a tiered process. And so for districts, we think about kids, universal prevention at a school. Everybody, all students, all adults need to be supported on there. But then there's times, some classrooms might need a little bit more support for whatever reason. Some might need intensive support, whether it's a new teacher or they have some really challenging students in the classroom. But just as how we're talking about that students move up and down this multi-tiered framework, and we've got to figure out ways to identify who needs the supports. Let's try to prevent as much as possible from happening. But let's also get in and provide the supports quickly, and provide these interventions quickly to kids. But also we can do this as a system too, for you at that district level, thinking about, well, what do all of your schools need in your district? Who needs a little bit more support, and then who needs the most intensive support, and using data in that process to make those decisions and monitor how well we're doing. So the big number one takeaway, I've got 5 takeaways for you before I turn it over to our district exemplar. Those 5 takeaways are to define those essential elements, making that very clear within your district. The second thing is the leadership team functions. So like I said, this applies whether it's a school team. It's important that they're addressing these functions, as well as a state level team. And so for you as the district level team, pulling together who are your people for this leadership teaming process, and knowing that there's actually 2 functions on this. There's the executive function that deals with that top part of who are our partners that we need to recruit. What's the funding and alignment? Because we don't want to appear as contradictory, but at the same time, we also don't want to appear as duplicating efforts as well. How does this impact policy across our district? And then what do we need to do to improve the workforce based upon what we're seeing in our data and what we actually need to achieve? From there, those implementation functions get into the training piece, how we're coaching and supporting our classroom teachers for implementation, as well as our administrators for implementing this, and the evaluation process of how folks are doing, and then what we're going to do in response to what those data show. Goal is that we're creating these local implementation demonstrations so others can come see how it works. So second takeaway is to build local capacity. The third is the continuous improvement process. And so this continuous improvement process, sometimes folks will refer to it as the problem solving process. But if we want to be not so much focused on problem per se, third takeaway is use data for continuous improvement. But I would add maybe almost 2 more steps in this process. When we're talking about continuous improvement, we want to continue things that are working well. But we also need to look and see where are things not working well. And I think sometimes by using the term problem solving, we're instantly going to focus only on the negative. Well, let's also think what is working well, because those are the things we want to sustain. But I would add this extra step in there. We've got to engage our partners and develop a common mission together, and figuring out who are we before we start figuring out what's happening. Why is this happening? What are we going to do about it? And then evaluate, is our plan working? And then add a 5th step in there on, we need to then communicate with the partners and solicit their feedback on who needs to know. Collecting a bunch of data doesn't help if we don't ever let the partners know what the data said and what we've done about it. So I think that's the piece sometimes that gets missed, is folks don't know what happened. So again, third takeaway is use that data for continuous improvement. The other thing about the PBIS framework for you to think about is that implementation logic piece. So this fourth takeaway is to adapt to meet the new or intensified needs. So when we're thinking of implementation logic, it's thinking about what do we need to do to get ready so that we're most successful for implementation? What do we need to do to get started? What do we need to do to get better? And there's a lot of different steps in it, but it's also a cyclical process in that you may have engaged in Tier 1 PBIS. You have already are getting better at it, but maybe you're starting to move into the advanced tiers and starting to look at readjusting your structures, your process for that, and how can we better identify students and get them the help faster within the PBIS framework. Well, that's the piece of where we're in that implementation logic. We're getting back to what do we need to do to get ready for this? Think of the partners we need to get involved. How does this affect our other systems we have in place? The alignment pieces, what types of training need to happen? So you can see that this is an ongoing process, but it's important to keep that implementation logic in your mind, because it's not so linear like we can check it off the list. In the implementation blueprint, we do have a snapshot of leadership team functions across the implementation phases. So if you wondered, like, okay, if I'm getting ready, here's a quick snapshot of all of the various types of tasks. It's not fully inclusive, but it's a quick snapshot of the overall tasks across these leadership team functions. And then it expands across what we've got for getting started, as well as for getting better. And last but not least is our fifth takeaway, is to get and stay connected. So that's one of the big goals of this community of practice that we've set up, but to remember that you're part of this implementation cascade. So even though all of your focus was within the district, knowing that what you were doing hopefully sometimes would inform the state in that process, but hopefully what you were setting up within the district infrastructure actually trickles down to impact the school, that impacts the classroom, because we want to have those positive impacts for the individual student.